everyone, welcome to Planet Zoo. The conservation pack has landed, and that means there's 4 new starter habitats added to the collection on Steam. If you're checking this out for the first time, basically the starter habitat series is a collection of back to basics habitats for every animal in the game. In a nutshell, they're set up to be easy to use, they don't require any DLC, and they tick all the boxes in terms of space requirements and welfare. I've gone into a bit more detail about this in the Starter Habitats initial video, so check out the link appearing on the screen now and that'll explain a little more about the series. Anyway, over the weekend I've updated the collection to include the 4 new habitat animals. First up is the Amur Leopard. The leopards are native to southeastern Russia and northern China, so the habitat requirement is for taiga and temperate biomes. I've leaned more heavily on taiga because honestly that's just a personal preference of mine. Key features of this habitat: I've got custom fencing and I've used the habitat climbable platforms for the visitor barrier. The animal barrier is secured with a thick plank here and that prevents the leopards climbing up this. The layout for this enclosure: the landscape slopes downwards and that gives a great view from the guest fence. I've used a concrete panel to create this step down effect. This is kind of mimicking also what would be a retaining wall in real life. So when you have a lot of earth like this, strong retaining walls are essential to hold back all that earth. Otherwise it would be making its way southwards pretty quickly. Up at the highest point of the enclosure, I've got a custom built shelter here, mostly made out of wood pieces, and it has a metal roof. On the top here, I've got a security barrier to prevent the leopards escaping from the roof. I find that most of the cats in Planet Zoo can jump pretty extreme distances, so I just knew straight away, as soon as I put this shelter right at the back, I was thinking, yeah, the kitties are going to jump right off that, so putting this in place prevents it. Something pretty cool with this one: climbing animals can normally climb right up these thin wood pieces, but I figured out if you attach a gutter piece at the top here, this acts like the climb protection does for the standard barriers in the game, and it completely turns off the climbability of all connected pieces because they've got nowhere to go. It took me a really long time with Planet Zoo to figure out that with climbing, there has to be a destination point in mind. If you've just got a pole that goes nowhere, they won't climb up it because, I don't know, it must be to do with the game mechanics. The animals have to have somewhere where they're going. Now I've figured that out, I'm getting a little better at making climbing enrichments in the game, whereas before I sucked at that. Anyway, that's about it for the Amur Leopard, so let's move on to the next one, which is the Przewalski's horse. Oh, I knew I would mess that up. You know, I'm not going to lie, I had to check how to pronounce that one on Google because I looked at it and went, yeah, that's Polish or something. And it was indeed, that's a Polish name. Oh, dearie me. The 5 minutes I spent practicing that was all for nothing. Right, compose yourself. Przewalski's horse. Przewalski's horse. That's it, Przewalski's horse. I've forgotten what I was going to say about it now. Oh yeah, that was it. Przewalski's horse is a Mongolian wild horse, so truthfully this habitat should have been on open plains grasslands sort of thing, but I couldn't resist the temptation to go completely domesticated on this one. I've always wanted to make a little paddock for horses in a game, so here we are. How I've set this up: there's 2 sets of stables with this central bridleway in the middle. The stables themselves, this is a repurposed hard shelter from what was originally the hard shelter I created for the camels way back when. It's a great shelter, so I've reused this quite a few times now. There's a couple more shelters in the field because the stables wasn't quite enough for all the horses to cover all of their needs with shelter, so I've added these and put the food troughs in them. As far as terrain and vegetation goes on this one, I've kept this entirely flat, so entirely the opposite of what I did for the leopard there. It's like one extreme to another, but going for the proper stables things I've done, I would imagine the ground to be fairly flat anyway. Same goes for adding flora and fauna. The horses can take or leave the fauna. There wasn't really much of a requirement, but there wasn't any sort of requirement that you have to keep it down either. I did try putting a couple of things in here or there, and it just didn't look right to me. I'm not like a horse person or anything, but for some reason, I've got it in my mind that I think for real life horses, they have to be really careful about checking for weeds and stuff growing in the paddocks, because horses can get really sick if they eat it, and they will eat it if it's in the paddock. I don't know how I know that, but one of those random facts that you just know for some reason. So with that in mind, that's why I didn't put loads of plants in here. To give it a bit of a colour boost at least, I've added the rows of miniature cypress trees along the fence line, and that does offer a little bit of variety. Nice and simple, sums this habitat up well. Anyway, let's move on to the next one. This habitat's for the Scimitar-Horned Oryx, and they herald from the North African grasslands, so really far north actually, almost bordering on the desert. Being both a grasslands and a desert biome animal, I've gone heavy on the bleached wood kind of architecture for this enclosure, so very light and airy, mimicking the heat beating down. This is quite challenging when you're working on an enclosure that doesn't use any of the theme pieces, so none of the African pieces can even be used, even from the base game. I always just look at what I've got to work with, and I'm quite proud of the custom pieces that I've made here. This is all custom fencing and custom hard shelters that I've built piece by piece using the base game painted planks and stuff. A big feature of this enclosure, I've separated the grazing section from the dry earth below. That's me kind of showing how this is melded from two different biomes. So grasslands up at the top and the desert bit down below. There's two different kinds of hard shelters. So you got the more open one here, and I've got some of the food troughs in here again. And this one up at the back is the sleeping quarters, basically. So this is more closed off and protected. Right, that's about it for the Oryx here. So let's move on to the final one, and that's for the Siamang. First big feature here, more custom fencing. Really got into making my own custom fencing. When they added the mesh paneling about 2 or 3 updates ago, that really was a game changer in terms of making your own stuff. And the fact that it's a base game Planet Zoo piece rather than a theme piece, that really stands in my favour making these starter habitats. As with the leopards earlier, the Siamangs are big climbers, so again I've used the gutter pipe here so that they can't climb up this mesh barrier to escape. The other big feature in this habitat is all of the climbing equipment. The Siamangs have a really heavy need for climbing, and when I say that it's a big requirement, it's almost bordering on ridiculous how much climbing equipment you have to put in to fulfill their climbing needs. Even with the extent of all the climbable pieces that I've put in here, I've only marginally hit the green with meeting their climbing needs, so worth bearing that in mind. Oh, and another important point, this fancy metal climbing frame is new in the game with the Conservation Pack DLC. However, it is counted as a base game piece, and you can get to this climbing frame even if you don't have the DLC. The only problem is it's counted as an enrichment item, and since I can't use enrichment items in the starter habitat enclosures, unfortunately I've had to delete this climbing frame out of the blueprint. Leaving it in would lock out the blueprint for use in the challenge mode, so to keep everyone happy, it's easier to avoid adding enrichment items altogether. I've just left it in to showcase the habitat now, gives you an idea what you can do with the climbing frame once you've unlocked that in-game. On that note, that is all for new animal habitats done for the Starter Habitat series. They're already loaded onto Steam. Check out the link pinned in the comments to download these directly. Thank you so much for watching. Bye for now.